After World War II, the United States held the Nuremberg trials. Nazi doctors were prosecuted, sentenced. Some were executed. The world called it justice. But there were other doctors. Doctors who ran experiments more extensive, more systematic, and more deadly than anything tried at Nuremberg. The United States found out about them and made a deal. 1936, Japan is expanding across Asia. The Imperial Army controls a vast stretch of northeastern China, a region called Manchuria. It is cold. It is remote. And it is far from the eyes of the world. In a small town called Pingfang, 24 kilometers south of Harbin, construction begins. The locals are told it is a lumber mill. It was not a lumber mill. What rose from the frozen earth of Manchuria was not a building. It was a city. 6 square kilometers. Over 150 structures. Laboratories. Dormitories. Operating theaters. Holding cells. And crematoriums. The crematoriums were built first. Because whoever designed this place understood from the beginning nothing that happened inside was ever meant to leave. The man behind it was Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii. He was not what you might imagine. He was charming, articulate, a graduate of Kyoto Imperial University, a licensed physician, a man who gave public lectures on hygiene and public health. He was also completely convinced that biological warfare would decide the next great war, and that Japan needed to master it before anyone else. He was right about the first part. In the early 1930s, Ishii traveled through Europe and the United States, studying Western approaches to biological research. He came back with one conclusion: no one was doing it at the scale he imagined. He petitioned the Imperial Army for funding. For land. For prisoners. He got everything he asked for. The facility was given an official name, the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Guangdong Army. Bureaucratic. Forgettable. Perfectly designed to describe nothing. The prisoners came by train. Mostly Chinese civilians. Prisoners of war. Some Russians, Koreans, Mongolians. They were not told where the train was going. The carriages had no windows. When they arrived, they were processed. Assigned a number. Given a new name. Not their own name. The Japanese staff called them Maryuta. It is a Japanese word. It means logs. As in lumber. To keep the cover story consistent. As in, not people. Inside the facility, order was total. The corridors were clean. The records were meticulous. The schedules were precise. This is the part that is hardest to understand. What happened in Unit 731 was not chaos. It was not the work of madmen acting alone in the dark. It was organized science. Conducted by trained physicians. Documented in peer-reviewed reports. Presented at conferences. Rewarded with military promotions. The doors in that corridor were numbered. Behind each one, an experiment was in progress. Filed. Dated. Signed. The research fell into categories. Biological weapons testing. Prisoners were infected with plague, cholera, typhoid, anthrax, and dysentery by injection, by contaminated food and water, or by being placed in sealed rooms where infected fleas were released. The researchers wanted to know, how quickly does each pathogen progress? What is the minimum lethal dose? How can it be deployed over a city? The answers were written down in notebooks just like this one, in handwriting that was neat and careful and utterly without remorse. Frostbite experiments. Manchurian winters reach -40 degrees Celsius. Prisoners were brought into this courtyard and their limbs were submerged in ice water, or simply held in the open air, until the tissue froze completely solid. The stated purpose was medical, to understand frostbite for Japanese soldiers fighting in cold climates. The method was to stand a human being in the cold until their arm or leg had to be amputated. Then to freeze the remaining limb and record what happened. Some experiments required surgery. Vivisection, live dissection, was performed on the 1990s. Coverage remains minimal. There are Japanese politicians today who still publicly dispute whether the experiments occurred. Several former Unit 731 researchers returned to civilian life and became prominent figures. Doctors, university presidents, government officials. Not one was ever prosecuted. History remembers Nuremberg as the moment the world said, "This must never happen again." But Nuremberg happened because it was convenient. The data had no military value to the victors. The accused had nothing to offer. When the data was worth more than the justice, the deal was made in silence. The trains stopped arriving at Pingfang in August 1945. The tracks are still there. No one was ever punished for driving them. That was Unit 731. One of the most extensively documented atrocities of the 20th century. And one of the least prosecuted. Next episode, 1518. A town in France. Hundreds of people begin dancing in the streets and cannot stop. Within weeks, some are dead. Historians still have no consensus on why. And it was not the only time it happened. Subscribe. The archive goes deeper. Anxious prisoners without anesthesia. The reasoning, recorded in official documents, was that anesthesia would alter the physiological results. Organs were removed and studied while the subject was alive. Stomachs were surgically rerouted to connect directly to the esophagus. Limbs were amputated and reattached, sometimes to opposite sides of the body. The researchers wore gowns. They used proper instruments. They kept detailed notes on what they observed. It looked, from the outside, like medicine. Beyond the buildings, there were open fields. Prisoners were tied to stakes, sometimes dozens at a time, while bombs filled with plague-infected fleas were detonated nearby. Researchers measured the spread radius, the infection rate, the time to first symptoms. Others were used as live targets to test flamethrowers, grenades, and chemical weapons, including mustard gas, hydrogen cyanide, phosgene. The observers watched from the bunker, through a small window, with clipboards. When an experiment was complete, the body was taken to the crematorium. Every body, every record of that person's existence inside the facility was destroyed along with them. Estimates of the total death toll range from 3,000 to 12,000. The true number will never be known, because the smoke took it. August 9, 1945. The Soviet Union declares war on Japan and invades Manchuria. Ishii receives a single order: destroy everything. Thousands of documents are fed into fires like this one. The facility itself is demolished with explosives. The remaining prisoners, accounts differ on the exact number, are killed. So they cannot testify. Ishii boards a train heading south. He expects to be arrested. He expects to be tried. He expects to die. He was wrong about all three. In the gray dawn, what had taken years to build came down in hours. 6 square kilometers of evidence. 150 buildings. A decade of work. Gone. Or so Ishii believed. American biological warfare researchers, operating under General Douglas MacArthur, located Ishii within months of Japan's surrender. They were not there to arrest him. The United States was entering the Cold War. The Soviet Union had biological programs. American researchers had almost no data. But Ishii had a decade of it, gathered in ways that could never be ethically replicated. The offer was direct: give us everything, every report, every finding, every result, and receive full immunity. No prosecution. No trial. No consequences. Ishii accepted. Between 1945 and 1947, thousands of pages of Unit 731 research were transferred to American military. Over 50 senior staff members were granted immunity. The agreement was signed by the U.S. State Department, the Department of War, and General MacArthur's headquarters. Then it was classified. The documents sat in archives. For decades, the arrangement was not public knowledge. When the Soviet Union held their own war crimes trial in 1949, the Khabarovsk trial, where captured Unit 731 personnel were convicted and sentenced, the United States dismissed it as communist propaganda. The classified agreement remains sealed. It was not a government whistleblower who finally revealed it. It was a researcher named Sheldon Harris filing Freedom of Information Act requests, one by one, throughout the 1980s. The documents were declassified gradually. Reluctantly. Over more than a decade. Shiro Ishii returned to civilian life in Japan. He was not imprisoned. He was not watched. He was not shunned. He lived quietly in Tokyo. Occasionally, in later years, he gave private interviews to researchers. He expressed no remorse. He died in 1959. Of throat cancer. At home. In his own bed. He was never charged with a single crime. Today, on the site of Unit 731, there is a museum. It opened in 1985, after Chinese archaeologists excavating the ruins found evidence Ishii's men had failed to fully destroy bones, equipment, fragments of records. The museum receives hundreds of thousands of visitors every year. In Japan, Unit 731 did not appear in school history textbooks until the 1990s. Coverage remains minimal. There are Japanese politicians today who still publicly dispute whether the experiments occurred. Several former Unit 731 researchers returned to civilian life and became prominent figures. Doctors, university presidents, government officials. Not one was ever prosecuted. History remembers Nuremberg as the moment the world said, "This must never happen again." But Nuremberg happened because it was convenient. The data had no military value to the victors. The accused had nothing to offer. When the data was worth more than the justice, the deal was made in silence. The train stopped arriving at Pingfang in August 1945. The tracks are still there. No one was ever punished for driving them. That was Unit 731. One of the most extensively documented atrocities of the 20th century. And one of the least prosecuted. Next episode, 1518. A town in France. Hundreds of people begin dancing in the streets and cannot stop. Within weeks, some are dead. Historians still have no consensus on why. And it was not the only time it happened.